Hello, welcome back to SAS From Scratch. This is episode 18. Unlike any of the other episodes in this series, this episode does not correspond to any particular chapter in the base prep guide. So the whole point of this video today is to just give you some information about the SAS Base Exam, and I will add a disclaimer at the very start to say whatever I tell you today is, as of April 2023, accurate. To the best of my knowledge, it's accurate. But I will also show you where I get the information from, and I strongly encourage you to make sure that at whatever point in the future you are writing this exam, that you go and double check that all of this information is still accurate. So, you have completed chapters 1 to 17 in the base prep guide. You've completed episodes 1 to 17 of this YouTube series that I did, and you are now ready to go and write the actual exam. So how do you do that? There's more than one way to do it. The first is to go and write it at a Pearson VUE center. The second is to write it from your home. Now, the way that this works is, so let's start with the first one. Let's talk about Pearson VUE, for example. They've got a bunch of licensed testing centers all over the world, and you register with them, you pay the exam fee. I think as of the time of recording, it's about $180. You pay the fee, you book an appointment, you pitch up at the testing center, and they will put you in front of a computer where you write the exam. And we'll talk about the format of the exam in due time, but that's the quick and easy way of doing it if you're just going to go to the Pearson Center. You can so basically you have to get transport to the center. You have to sit there, you have to book some time out of your day and account for the commute as well, back and forth. But that's pretty much it. They will control the testing environment. They'll make you, so your phone, any extra, electronics, keys, smartwatch, anything goes into a little locker, and you go into a controlled exam environment and you go and write your exam. The second option is to write the exam from home. Now, the way that works is that it is a proctored exam. You can write it from home, but there will be an examinator watching you. So if you've got like a webcam, you'll have to have a webcam either built into your laptop or you have an external webcam linked to your computer. You would basically need to have a clean room with a clean desk, no cluttered papers or anything on there, and you would have to be willing to show via the webcam the examiner around your room. And so the examiner can tell you to remove certain papers or certain items from the room. And I know, for example, and I suspect it's very, very similar for the proctored SAS exam, for the Linux Systems Administrator exams that are also proctored, where the examiner observes you remotely. If, for example, somebody knocks on your door, or they hear background noises, or anything that they could deem suspicious, you fail the exam immediately. So if you want to write this from home, you basically need a clean room, a clean desk. There's a desk, a chair, and your laptop. You have to be willing to show the examiner around it, and you have to make sure that there's absolute silence, no interruptions. Your kid doesn't open the door, or your spouse, or whatever, because that is how you are going to fail. Now, why would you choose to do the exam from home? Because you can control the hardware environment, for example. So you could have a nice big screen to work with, which you might not have at the testing center, and we'll see why that's important. You'll have your own keyboard and mouse if that's something you're particular about, and you just have the general comfort and familiarity of your own home. But the safer option, and the option I've always gone for, was to just go to a Pearson center and write the exam there. Let's talk a bit about the exam environment, because I think that's going to be important to show you. So there's a blog on the SAS blogs website by Mark Stevens. And so this is the blog post itself. What I want to, and you can go and read this in your own time, what I want to focus on is this screenshot that's shown here. And this is what your exam environment is going to look like. Now, your exam consists of a performance-based or lab section. That's where you have to write code, solve a problem, and give the answer to the exam software. There's also a multiple choice section. Now, back in the day, the SAS exams were only multiple choice. These days, they are a mixture of performance-based and multiple choice, or a lab section and a multiple choice section, which means that you have to write some code, and then a smaller portion of the exam is dedicated to multiple choice questions. Now, this is what the environment is going to look like once you get into it. And there will be a time limit of, I'm not sure of the time limit exactly. I want to say it's maybe a 2-hour exam, but I don't know that for a fact. So that we'd need to, you would have to go and double check that. But when you sit down, the clock doesn't actually start running immediately. So you would sit down and you would be able to see this screen without the questions actually popping up. So there will be a little introductory section that says, set up your environment, open whatever interface you prefer, and you'll notice there's SAS Studio. Of course, SAS Studio because that's what we've been using throughout this series. There's SAS Enterprise Guide, if that's something you're more familiar with, and there's the normal SAS windowing environment as well, if you prefer that. So you can pick your environment of choice. You set that up. You can, enable line numbers or disable. Same with the autocomplete, syntax completion, all that sort of thing. I tend to turn the syntax completion off because I don't like it very much. I've programmed in SAS long enough to know what I'm looking for. The important thing that I've always found was the screen size tends to be a problem. So if you go to a testing center, and I went to, the testing center I went to was not bad. It was quite modern. It had flat screens. It had, was a nice professional testing center, but the screen resolution was absolutely terrible. Now, I've seen this same complaint over and over again on the internet, but it appears to be a common problem everywhere. Doesn't matter if you're in a first world country, a third world country, wherever, there's no guarantee that the screen setup is going to be perfect. And so a lot of the time, you're going to have to kind of fiddle around a bit to make sure you get things set up before you get started with the exam. You can see here on the left-hand side where the question is coming from. That takes up a big chunk of your real estate. That takes up about a third of your real estate. And you can shift this slightly, but I think if I recall correctly, every new question kind of, wobbled that sidebar back to its normal size. And so what you would rather want to do is within this little remote desktop square that you have here, is just resize your window for SAS Studio or SAS Enterprise Guide, whatever it might be, to fit into that little square. And sometimes you have to work with quite a small piece of screen real estate to do your programming. The way that this exam works is, you can see, for example, here, this is a demo question. So it'll say, okay, well, combine these two data sets, and only if something is in both data sets, so you're doing a inner join basically, and we've looked at that in episode 10. Then you will write them out to a new data set, and with these results, answer the next 4 questions. So it'll say here, okay, well, how many rows do you have in your resulting data set? And you can only know that once you've actually successfully completed the programming section. Because, for example, let's say the first data set has 10,000 rows and the other data set has 10,000 rows, but there's no way for you to check by hand manually how many data sets correspond. You either know how to solve this problem in SAS or you don't. So that's the way that the performance-based, the lab sections run. You do something and you answer questions about what you've done. You put in some numbers, what is the mean of this rounded to 1 decimal, etc. And the system uses your answers to check whether you are right or wrong. So the system does not actually evaluate your code. It does do that for the SAS Advanced certification, but it does not do that for the SAS Base certification, at least not when I wrote it. So you would have to solve problems, give answers, and the system knows whether you are right or wrong based on the answers you give. And you could have only gotten those answers if you knew how to program to get there. So this test environment can be a little frustrating due to the screen resolution. The questions and this little virtual desktop that you work in are in the same window. They can't be split or taken, or separated from one another. And you need to scroll back and forth in the window to make sure you can see all of the data and all of the code and whatever. So that's something to prepare yourself for mentally. The other item that I want to highlight is I have never felt that the exam questions were unfair. I think the exam is very fair, but some of the questions can, if you have a lapse in concentration or you glance over something and don't read it carefully, you can very well get it wrong. You have to stay focused on what the question is asking you. And you have to know the answers very, almost intuitively. It should be second nature to you. And a good way of prepping for that is also with the multiple choice questions, for example, that you can find in the back of or at the end of each chapter in the SAS Base Prep Guide. Because the questions that you'll end up seeing in the exam are not the same questions and answers, obviously, but in a similar style, in a similar fashion. So there's not going to be if you're dealing with a multiple choice question, A, B, C, D, there's not going to be a freebie in there where you're going to look at it and say, oh, well, D is not even SAS syntax, this is something completely different. All of the answers look more or less correct, and you need to have a very, very thorough understanding of the way SAS works and the SAS syntax before you go and write the exam. Like I said, the exam is, to my knowledge, in April 2023, around $180. Sometimes SAS will have a sort of a discount. It's usually, I think, around the September, October. I think they're around when the new when the universities start in the US, for example, you can sometimes get the exam for a little bit cheaper, but work on $180. With that being said, $180 is a fair amount of money. It's not something that you want to, throw into the wind. Back in, it was quite a few years back when I wrote this exam, you could buy a practice exam as well. To my knowledge, these days there is a free practice exam that the SAS Institute makes available. I could be wrong on this, but I believe recently they've made a practice exam available, and you can use this to obviously see if you're ready, if you're prepared for the real exam. Now, I would suggest don't go and download that immediately and then look at your notes and look at the videos and all of that. Prepare for it as you would for the real exam, and go into it almost blind, because you're going to have that same sort of unfamiliarity and stress when you go into the real exam. Lastly, final tip is there is nothing quite as good as real world programming and problem solving experience. If you have done data science before in your job, excellent. If you've worked with SAS before in your job, even better. And the questions are not super difficult. You can see, for example, the demo question that's here on the left hand side. You're going to merge these two. You're going to do an inner join kind of merge, and you're going to count how many records are in there. And you can even get that from your log, because your log will say, okay, well, the resulting data set after the merge contains X number of records. So that's a straightforward way of solving it. And you're going to solve this in a very, very short amount of time, provided that you know what you need to do. You're not going to write 50 to 100 lines of code. You're going to write 15 lines of code to solve it, maybe. And even that is fairly generous. So this is a very good idea of what you can expect for the environment itself. Now, something else I want to just point you to is on the SAS website. This is the credential you're looking for, the Base Programming Specialist. And it's base programming using SAS 9.4. Again, that's in April 2023. There might be a newer version of SAS in the future when you watch this video. So there's a few. So there's programming fundamentals, which I think is maybe a little bit too easy. I would suggest that this should be your starting certification. This is your base, your foundational certification. Something that I do want to point out is, we can just check here. What is the pricing? Global exam pricing is $180, and sometimes there might be discounts. We're not going to go into that. This is the exam ID that you register with on Pearson VUE. 135 minutes, so that's 2 hours and 15 minutes. Passing score 725, and the score range is from 200 to 1,000 points. So you need to score, 72.5% minimum, I guess, is what they're trying to say there. This is how the exam content is divided and weighted. So 20 to 25% is for accessing and creating data structures. 35 to 40% is managing data, 15 to 20% is error handling. That also includes syntax errors, being able to evaluate why a certain syntax is wrong and how to fix it. 15 to 20% generating reports and outputs. That's your proc print, your proc means, proc frec, your ODS stuff that we looked at. And then lastly, something I want to look at is this exam content guide. Now, I've downloaded it already, and I've made a couple of notes on it to go through it. So you can see I've scribbled and graffitied all over it. I want to stress again that this was accurate as of April 2023 when I'm recording these videos. That does not mean that this is going to be accurate in perpetuity. So there's a few things that we need to look at. I'm going to run through these topics. I'm going to try and link them to the different episodes that we did so that you can go and look them up if you need to. But you need to know all of these topics. You cannot just go based on the videos alone. You will have to also look through the prep guide itself. Because there are one or two things that I've missed, and I've not missed, but maybe not gone into as much detail as I should have. And I'm going to highlight it here. I've highlighted it in red, and you'll have to go and look that up as well. So using a data step to create a SAS dataset from an existing dataset, we've done that several times. That's where we, set a particular source dataset and we made a new one. Investigating SAS libraries, a libname statement to assign a library reference, and investigating of the proc contents procedure. We covered that in episode 3. We used the libname statement regularly throughout the different episodes as well. Accessing data with the set statement, we did that in almost every episode. Proc import, we covered in episode 4, the SAS and Access XLSX engine to read a Microsoft Excel file. We covered that in episode 4. I believe in episode 4 I touched on the guessing rows statement, but you would have to maybe just go and play around with that, practice, and make sure you fully understand what this does. But I do believe I talked about it a bit in episode 4. Combining SAS dataset, we did this in episode 10. So concatenating it, merging it one-to-one, and merging it one-to-many, that's covered, done and dusted. Working with SAS date values, how it's stored, how the formats work, and then how they are displayed. So we touched on in formats and formats. We actually went into quite a bit of detail, and we did explore how SAS stores its date and time values. That's all in episodes 12 and 13. Then controlling which observations and variables in a SAS dataset are processed and output. The where statement we covered in episode 4. We subset variables with the drop and keep statements and the drop equals and keep equals dataset options. That's also in episode 4. So that is covered, done and dusted. Now, sorting observations in a SAS dataset, the very first time we even looked at proc-sort was episode 2, but we used it in several of the episodes. So you can go through that. You can look at it in your prep guide as well. Excuse me. The one thing we did not look at was removing duplicate observations with the sort procedure. Now, that's just the no dup key keyword that you need to learn about. You can look that up in your prep guide. You can look it up on the SAS online documentation. It's very simple to use, but that is left as homework for you to catch up on. Conditionally executing SAS statements, that's your conditional statements if then else, using the do and the end statements to have a whole block of code that is executed conditionally. We talked about this in episodes 4, episode 9, episode 10. All 3 of those touch on these subjects. Creating new variables and assigning a new value to an existing variable, and assigning the value of an expression to a variable. We've used this throughout. Chapter 9 in your prep guide is where I believe they really, try and drill home all of the things you need to know about that. But throughout the episodes in code, we did all of these. Assigning a constant date value to a variable, you can look at episode 13 for that. Changing the names of variables by using the rename dataset option. So I believe I definitely did it in episode 11, but that's not exactly where it corresponds in the prep guide. So if you want to read more about it in your prep guide, I believe it was in an earlier chapter, and I was a bit late on that. Label and format statements. Labels we looked at in episode 6. Formats we looked at in episode 12. The length of the variable we looked at in episode 9, and that is important. Lengths are a big part of the SAS ecosystem, I want to say. Working with by statements, the first and last flags, the retain and the sum statements, that's all in episodes 8 and 9. That's covered. And then we get to the SAS functions to manipulate character data, numeric data, and date values. So you can read through all of these. So 14a covers the date functions, 14b the string and character functions, and 14c the numeric functions. The only one I've not covered was the rand function, I believe. I think everything else I have focused on in the videos, but it's good to practice all of these things before you go and write the exam as well. The rand function, just look it up either in your prep guide or the SAS online documentation. Using SAS functions to convert character data to numeric and vice versa, that's your put and input functions. We look at that in episode 12. The automatic conversion that they mention here, just go through it once again in the prep guide before you write the exam. Iterative do loops, conditional and nested do loops, we've done all of that in episode 11. Restructuring data with proc transpose, I went over that in episode 17, and you would need to look at the online documentation as well. As I've said in this episode itself, I do not believe that this is covered within the base prep guide, at least not the 5th edition, which I have. Similarly, for the basics of macro variables, this is covered in episode 17, but I do not believe that this is covered within the base prep guide, at least not in the 5th edition, which I have. So these two you need to study based on the online documentation. Identifying and resolving programming logic errors, the put log statement and put statements, they are in episode 5, and we looked at the n and error variables as well. Syntax errors, this is important. SAS will give you things that are written wrongly. So for example, an unmatched quotation mark, a missing semicolon, an option which is just not right for a certain procedure, and you should know what the correct thing is. Misspelled keywords, for example, you should be able to fix. And the log is invaluable in figuring out what your error is. Read your log, the log tells you what's wrong, and then you can go and fix it. Now, we looked at very basic bits of this in episode 5, not really in detail. You know, throughout the whole series of episodes, we covered bits of it step by step, but this should be in chapter 5 in your prep guide as well. It'll go over some more examples of errors and mistakes. Generating reports with the print procedure, we looked at that in episode 6, and I believe we covered all of these sub items. Generating summary reports and frequency tables, so that's in episodes 7 and 15. So 7 was kind of using it to examine your data and to make sure there's no data issues. Episode 15, we looked at these things in a bit more detail. So proc univariate and proc means they're more or less the same thing. There's a particular function that is available, I believe, in proc univariate that is not available in proc means, but they are, for the most part, the same procedure by a different name until you get into more advanced statistics. But you can check this with the within the prep guide as well. These options, so the frequency table with n levels and order, I believe that's something I forgot to highlight in red as well. So you can look into that. I'm not sure how prevalent these questions are in the SAS Base exam, but that's something else that you would like to look at as well before. For the enhancing reports, the formats, titles, footnotes, I mean, we cover most of this in episodes 6 and 12. There's two options here. So proc format, this CNT lin option you need to go look at, and for proc print, the split equals option you need to just go look at as well. ODS we looked at in episode 16. It's pretty straightforward. You wrap it in whatever ODS destination you want, PDF, HTML, Excel, or RTF. And you can specify a particular style. That is all covered extensively in the prep guide as well, and we looked at some examples in episode 16. Exporting data, I think we covered exporting to the to an XLSX file with episode or in episode 4. We did not look at the proc export procedure. It's going to be very similar to proc import. It's just instead of data coming in, it's data going out. And this will be covered extensively in the SAS Base prep guide as well. Important to know. And then the last note that they give here at the bottom is all 23 main objectives will be tested on every exam. The 70 expanded objectives are provided for additional explanation and define the entire domain. So all of these items you will be tested on, and the passing score is fairly high. So I mean, from what I can see here, it's about 72.5%. So you do need to know your stuff before you register for it. However, that is about all I can share with you. I hope that this series has been useful. I've enjoyed presenting it. It's been fun. I initially did it for a couple of colleagues of mine who were interested in moving from R to SAS, and I've heard from just people who have shared it here and there with friends and other colleagues as well, that they found it useful. So that's a very small subset of people. Hopefully it has been useful for you as well if you're watching. I would like to thank you one last time for your time, for bearing with all of my waffling and rambling, and I want to say good luck for the exam. You can drop a comment down below. You can let me know how your exam went. If I've missed anything else on this list, or there's anything you would like to share with other people watching, feel free to drop that in there as well. Until next time, cheers. Have a good rest of your day. Bye-bye.